All right, and we are live for Campfire number 16, and it's going to be a very, very different Campfire this time. I have Don the developer with me today, and we're going to bring in a few minutes three new camp graduates who are going through their job search journey. Don, I want to say a few words. I want to welcome you to the show. Many people will recognize you and what you've done for the community for a few years now. You are, and for those of you who don't know you, you are a very respected figure in the coding community, especially thanks to the very unique reviews that you're doing. And you've done that for what, a couple of years now? When did you start actually?
November, I think I switched over my format around September, November of 2020.
September, yeah, that's right. And so you're producing very unique reviews of coding boot camps, and that's what really made you very famous in the industry. 1 hour long, real stories from real graduates sharing their experiences. And I know you've helped a tremendous amount of people making their decision as to what to do, which coding boot camp or no coding boot camp, self-taught. But you've really helped a ton of people that are trying to get into the industry. And I also want to say that you are also, I believe, a moral compass in the industry, that you not just help students make good decisions. I think you also indirectly helping leaders in the industry make good decisions. And I think I want to thank you for that as well. So I had the honor of being on your show in December 2020, which was actually very shortly after you started, as well as a couple of months ago, and we discussed really sharing what is not shared that much. It's really the struggle of finding a job after a coding bootcamp, or just after being a self-taught developer. And it's a very hard experience to go through. The market is saturated. It's very tough to get that first junior developer role. And so really, with your knowledge, with your experience helping others, really wanting to bring three graduates from New Camp who are going through that. And so we're going to welcome them now. And I'll stay in the background. I'll hand over the keys to you, Don. And I may actually, for anyone actually joining, you can ask your questions. I'll be the one probably checking out those questions, bringing them to the floor. And so let's bring Alex, Kristen, and Gus. Hello, everyone. Good to have
Hi.
you with us. And Don, please go ahead.
Sounds good. Well, Ludo, I appreciate you doing this. I remember I just pinged this idea of, hey, do you have any graduates struggling to find a job? And I like doing this. I like kind of digging into where people are getting stuck. And the thing is, a lot of people are getting stuck. A lot of people are frustrated. And, sometimes people feel alone. They don't feel like others are struggling. But I promise you, everyone else is struggling to get that first job. So I actually want to give a shout out to all of you. A lot of people, Alex, Kristen, and Gus, a lot of people won't even put themselves out there. They won't even make a LinkedIn post. They won't comment on any threads. Like, they're just shy and they're more reserved. And all three of you are at least willing to actually show yourselves and have this conversation, show a little vulnerability. So, I mean, that's pretty awesome. You got to give yourself a pat on the back for that. But I guess what we'll start out with is kind of just like a quick 1-minute intro on how the job search is going for all of you. I guess we can do this one at a time. Alex, if you want to go ahead and start.
Sure. So actually, our class graduates tomorrow. The 19th will be the last part of our module for the full stack development bootcamp that I'm in. And as far as my job search, I've been seeing a lot of remote work being posted in the job boards, but the majority of them are requesting a lot of experience and some technologies that I haven't learned yet. With me being in Alaska, there's not many businesses that are here that are actually hiring for developers. So really the only choice that I have is to try to find a remote job. And that's kind of the problem that I'm having right now, or at least experiencing.
Yeah. Finding a remote job for your first position could be pretty tough. Well, One state I might move to in like 10 years is Alaska. So I'm a little envious, but I do get the frustration of not a lot of opportunities out there. But we could definitely dive into that. Okay, cool. Thank you. How about you, Kristen?
Yeah, I graduated New Camp last month in February, but I've been self-taught since 2019, and I would say I really started applying to jobs and seeking jobs last year. So it's been a while. I would say since I started New Camp, I've gotten much further in the process with companies through interviews and just hearing back from them. So I know that the connections that I've made with people in New Camp has helped. And I've gotten further than I did on my own, but it's kind of that last step or, the technical interviews I think are really the most challenging for me. It's where I think I'm getting stuck, but there's probably some more areas also.
What's a challenge? You don't have to go into detail of like exactly the problem, but what was your main challenge that you got stuck on in one of the interviews?
I would say it's the ones that send you a coding assessment that have to be completed. They give you like 30 minutes or 20 minutes. And I study a lot of data structures and algorithms on my own, and I feel like I can do easy ones. I still working on the medium level difficulty. But I feel like a lot of the ones that are given are extremely difficult. And so even getting past that process, I think that's where I find myself tripping up the most, I think.
Okay. Like what makes you feel like you're tripping up? Do you feel like, is it like a remote assessment where they're not with you on that and you just have to solve the challenge? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Maybe we can dive into that. All right, cool. How about you guys?
Yeah, I graduated about 6 months ago in October last year. I've been actually, I had a mentor. I have a mentor. His name is Elliot Sanford. He was on a show. I reached out to him, and he's been helping me tremendously, and I really appreciate him for doing that. And he got me through the hump of. My challenge was getting interviews, and he helped me get over that hump. Now I'm getting interviews, and now I'm kind of in the same spot where Kristen is. Not doing well on the technical interviews.
Okay. Why do you feel like you're not doing well in the technical interviews?
Time. I take a little bit longer than most to process the problem. I'm able to verbalize it just fine. Putting it down to code in a timely manner, it's what's kind of tripping me up.
Okay. So you feel like if you had like 10, 15 extra minutes, you'd be able to solve the problem?
Right.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, so it's hard to know. It's hard to know whether a company cares about that or not. And you'd be surprised at how often they don't really care about the solution. They really kind of just care about your implementation. And so a lot of these challenges might be sent to you, and they're just analyzing the implementation you decided to go with, especially if, I think it's really valuable when they're with you, right? Sometimes it can be intimidating when you have someone like watching over your shoulder, but then you absolutely know that like they kind of just want to engage and interact with you and just see how you work through a problem. And it's okay to ask them questions potentially, and you can ask more. The tricky thing about those algorithms that are just sent to you, you have to do them in 30 minutes. You don't really know the limitations. You don't really know what's out of bounds, and you don't really know all the variables. You can't ask those questions. So I would argue those kind of challenges are just intimidating. And I find that people usually do better than they think they do. You just have to realize, it's hundreds of people applying to the same position. So I think it's important to recognize. I think it's really important to recognize that when you tackle these challenges and you don't get that call back, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't have the skill level that companies are looking for, right? Companies are more specific than you. Like they're very, very targeted, and they will weed you out very quickly for really minor, small things just because they have to get through hundreds of applicants. So it's important to realize just because, you failed an interview doesn't mean the next company won't hire you. And you have to keep that mindset. But what's also important is you have to realize that you have to be able to assess whether you're growing as a software engineer. Kristen, you mentioned that you started getting calls back, and you feel like you've progressed a little bit more in the job search, and you are at that tail end, right? You're close to getting that position, but you have to think about, well, how do I even identify that I'm there? And I think a lot of people are going through the job search for so long, they lose track of the progress they're actually making growing as a software engineer. So I kind of just want to go over a couple tips, and then I want to dive into your individual situations. But I think it's important to track. I remember someone from Ludo's team emailed me. I forget who, but at least one of you're tracking all of your jobs you're applying to, right? So you track them in a spreadsheet. And what jobs, like what are they, front end jobs? Are they back end jobs? What kind of companies are they, right? If you can provide more information like that and say, oh, okay, so for some reason, this hospital called me back for a back end position, but no other position, call me back. Why is that, right? And maybe you could even look at maybe the cover letter that you submitted. If you took a little time to do that, your values aligned with them. Maybe you were a lifeguard. Maybe you, I don't know, you went to nursing school, or like there was something relatable. You have to look for those patterns, and you're, as long as you're tracking everything, all the job applications and how far you got in them, I think over time, you'll start to see patterns of what companies value you. And that can start targeting and helping you be efficient with your time at applying to the companies that are going to align with your background and who you are as a person, right? And so what I'm saying is very true, but it's hard to achieve. The very first step is tracking all that information and trying to look for those patterns. I think that's really important. Okay, so I think I kind of have a sense of where all of you are. I actually want to go around real quick. We'll start with you, Alex. What could we do today, like during this chat, that you would find value in? Like, what would be the most helpful thing that I could do for you right now?
Well, like I said, the jobs that I'm coming across, most of them have been remote, just because some of the businesses here in Alaska, they're pretty spread out. Alaska's a really large state, so finding jobs that specialize in either front end, back end, or full stack, majority of them are looking for tons of experience and utilizing technologies that I don't have experience with just yet. Although I have been looking at building my repertoire and my toolkit. So I'm guessing what could be gone over is looking at remote jobs and the type of descriptions and what their requirements are, and trying to find a way to relate to that job and maybe polish myself up to be worthy enough to be looked at by those companies. Because I feel like a lot of them are asking for 3 to 5 years worth of development experience. Well, I've been self-taught since 2017, somewhere in that area. So I don't feel like I have enough professional experience. Although I do feel like if they were to give me a shot, I'd be able to figure it out fairly quickly. So trying to figure out how to, I guess, mirror myself to be better suited for those remote roles when they're asking for things that I don't have just yet would be of benefit.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I hear that a lot. So I feel like with a lot of these job postings and what I've seen, you're not going to meet all the requirements. And I think trying to achieve all these requirements and use that as an indicator that you're qualified and they're going to consider you, it's very self-defeating. I find a lot of people getting very discouraged because no one's going to line up with all the requirements. In all my jobs, I've never aligned with all the requirements ever. And so you have to realize, like, just because they have those requirements doesn't mean that you're not qualified or you're not getting considered. So sometimes it's not about trying to some people like literally spit all their requirements out in a cover letter, just like keywords, and they're just trying to include them all in, like, hey, I've done this, or a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. But I think it's important to recognize that at the entry level, if the company is going to be considering you for an entry level position, it's a huge cultural fit. How are you exposing your personality? How are you sharing your process? Who are you on LinkedIn, right? I guarantee you employers are looking at that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you're willing to come on and do this. Most aspiring developers aren't, they get nervous, and I mean, you're doing a great job with this. So I think, Alex, just showing some of your personality on LinkedIn can help build those connections early, right? So I talked about it, but like when you're making posts or you're engaging on LinkedIn in a constructive way with other engineers, with aspiring developers, with CTOs and other people that create content, you can engage with that content. You'll find that people randomly will start adding connections with you, right? And so I think a big advantage that you can have to really overcome your distance is start building those connections and exposing who you are as a person. That's going to make the company way more inclined to take a shot at you. And I'm telling you, like 99% of people don't do this. They kind of stay reserved. They continue like really coding hard, or they will like, they'll just hear what I say and then they'll go to a meetup, but they won't engage. They won't network. They won't go out of their comfort zone, right? So it's I guess, being bold and assertive in connecting with others, I think will start to create the right connections for you to be considered more. So, but I also want to talk about like this remote thing. It's really hard to get a remote position. And so I know that's what you're aiming for. You're in Alaska, right? Let me ask you this. Are you willing to relocate?
I am. It does cost a lot to get
Mhm.
to Alaska and from Alaska, but I am willing and open to relocation. Not necessarily needing relocation assistance, but it would be great. But I am willing to relocate.
Okay, so have you been to any other states in the United States?
Yes. I've been up and down the Eastern Seaboard, a lot of Midwestern states and California and Washington. So I've been traveled around quite a bit.
Wow. Okay, so that's a huge advantage right there. So with getting that remote position at an entry level, a concern that companies are going to have, relocation fees from Alaska, that's expensive. You can negotiate that. I think even negotiating them paying, half of your fees is going to be tough at the entry level, right? You being willing to accept a position without, taking the relocation expenses, they don't have to pay that out. That's the worst case scenario. But if you're willing to do that, I can tell you that's a concern in some companies' minds, given the salary that's going to be offered at that entry level. So worst case scenario, if you're willing to do that, that can be an advantage. And sometimes you don't have to say that up front. Like I said, it's a negotiation. And really it's about showing your personality and trying to connect with the interviewer. But another concern is, have you even been in the area, right? Our company's hosted, I don't know, in San Francisco, right? And have you even been to San Francisco? Are you going to like it? Are you going to move a year later? Like, how do I know you're going to stay here? How do I know that you're not going to like the area, right? And so if you've been to different states and you've been to just different areas of where you are applying, and so that's a hint. It's like probably apply to the areas that you've been before, that you have family, that you can show, hey, you can even, if you're in Alaska, you can kind of talk a bit about that. I love, I don't know, there's just my favorite coffee shop in San Francisco. I love it. I'm so sad that I had to move away from that. I noticed you guys were located like 6 blocks from that. That's a perfect fit. Maybe you could word it a little bit differently, but it's quirky stuff like that and engaging in that way that can help kind of alleviate companies' concerns, because a company spends a lot of money ramping you up. And so alleviating some of those concerns and that you're going to stick around for a while, when those questions kind of come up and they're digging into that a bit, just keep that in the back of your mind. So, I would apply to positions that eventually maybe you can move to that state. Maybe it's like a year down the road and they're considering it remote first. And it could just be a trial on both parties. And you could even, like, some companies will give out contracts like 3-month trial, like it's remote, at entry level, it's kind of risky. Do we really want to chance it? Some companies are willing to do contracts like that, but yeah, it can be tough. One last thing I want to say about that is usually companies are looking for 2 things with remote positions, 2 main things. They're looking for other things, but with remote positions, are you self-disciplined? Do you have the drive? Do you have the time management skills to be able to day-to-day plan out your day and effectively execute it, right? Do you have that self? Because a lot of people, we're all in our homes. We go home. We build up patterns of, oh my God, what a long day. I'm going to sit on the couch, or, I'm just hungry. I'm going to go in the kitchen, right? And so a lot of these habits that we've been building up while we're comfortable at home we have to fight against those habits to be a remote developer, to be in a remote position and say, nope, I know I want to go on the couch. I know I want to relax. I know I want to lay back in bed, but I'm not going to do that. Right. And so you train yourself to, go in front of the computer and you just have a set schedule. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but you have a set schedule to build up good habits and patterns of self-discipline. If you can showcase that, that's huge, right? Some people will have that in their old industry. They had an old remote position and they could say, it worked out really well. Company loved me. I'm just looking to get into web development. But another thing is self-discipline, but also communication, right? Has it been like 4 hours? Is it like your first week, it's been 4 hours? You haven't made any progress and you're stuck and you haven't chosen to reach out to a senior developer? Are you not keeping people up to date? Are you not keeping product up to date with where you are with certain issues, right? So also a lot of it is communication. And that usually is built up. Communication and self-discipline is built up over many years of being a developer. But that's something also that you're going to have to prove, right? Are you a good communicator? And you can showcase that in the interview. So really focusing on building up your communication, your effective communication at accomplishing what you want to accomplish. Practice that. You could practice it outside the interview, but deliver that experience in the interview. And I think those two main things can also help alleviate a lot of concerns for remote positions. Does that make
Awesome.
sense?
Thank you. It does. And like I said, I've traveled around. I work remotely as an IT specialist
awesome.
right now for a company, and they were kind of hesitant about doing the whole remote thing and allowing me to move from Indianapolis all the way across to Alaska. But it's been great, and I hear what you're saying, and I think it would apply directly to what I can do. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Definitely do not shy away from bringing that up in the interview and highlighting it on your resume. That's huge. Cool. All right, Kristen.
I was thinking maybe we can just take one question from the audience. I see one here, and then after that, go to Kristen. Dennis is asking, what's a good resource to practice with the coding challenge? I find myself just drawing a blank. I think it echoes a little bit what we heard from Gus. When I see the challenges in the job interview. Any idea on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So what I find is a lot of people jump into data structures and algorithms too quickly, way too quickly. They don't have the fundamentals down. And more importantly, learning fundamentals isn't about going through a course that's really good at teaching fundamentals. It's about going through that course and applying those fundamentals through implementation, building personal projects, applying it. That's going to reinforce your fundamentals. So when people are usually struggling with that, majority of the time, they don't have those fundamentals down. They don't even understand the core. I've seen it with JavaScript. I've seen people tackle JavaScript algorithm questions, and they're just really struggling. We just did an interview where I did a senior mock interview where one of the structures was essentially, I think what he did, he put it into a class, but for someone to even build out a class and be able to store data in it, some people don't even use classes in JavaScript. Classes are weird. They're off of the prototype chain, and it's they're not real classes, but a lot of people that would even tackle these algorithm type challenges, they never implemented that, right? They never built a new instance out of a class. They have no idea what I'm talking about when I bring it up. And so I think really diving into the fundamentals of whatever language that you're learning and getting that down. And the only way you're going to do that is actually applying it to personal projects. Now, so this is something actually that some people might disagree with, but I think you should really tackle a lot of personal projects first, get the fundamentals down, and then slowly introduce yourself into more complicated data structures, and maybe start with a linked list. It's a really good, a little bit more of a complicated data structure to start with. And so I'm telling you, everyone thinks that they have to find the perfect course that goes over this stuff. There's so many good YouTube videos. If you want to learn data structures in JavaScript, tons of videos on that. You want to learn in Python, tons of videos on that, right? And so I think it's about finding the teacher, the content creator that teaches it in a way that resonates with you. But you have to, and this is a big mistake people make it with, before they build personal projects, they make it with the algorithm type challenges as well. You have to code outside of it. If a course is just telling you line for line, okay, now code this line, and not really teaching it to you in a complex way that forces you to kind of go off on your own a little bit, you're not going to remember it. It's not going to make sense. And I think it's really helpful as well when you learn it in the context of this, a linked list can solve this problem, right? Think about this problem that you might implement in your code. And like recursion was a really, really tricky one for me. And I'm like, why do I have to learn this, right? It's slower. I guess it looks better, but it's slower. Like, why am I learning this? And then, for my first position, I didn't really get recursion down until I had to rebuild a couple of queries, jQuery queries, where I had to recursively go through each child element until I got to the end. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. I can dump this entire jQuery library and just rebuild a few different JavaScript functions to be able to recreate this. This is awesome. So sometimes when people are struggling to really comprehend what they're learning with data structures and algorithms, try to find resources that will also give a little bit more context of why that data structure or that algorithm is even relevant. And sometimes like people struggle with math a lot. They can't just spit out an equation, like they can't remember it in their head. But like if you tackle it with kind of just you just write it out in a paragraph, Sally did this a number of times, and you look at it in a paragraph and it's an actual situation, like sometimes it's just another way to introduce this concept in your head in just a different perspective. And so, I mean, you can go to Code Wars, HackerRank. There are tons of things you could just Google and you'll find tons of search results. But my main piece of advice with that is just find a teacher or content creator that teaches it in a way that resonates with you. And if that way doesn't resonate with you, try another one.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, sure. All right. Cool. How about you, Kristen?
Yeah. I think the most beneficial thing I guess we could talk about is, for me, it's like finding a balance between what I need to work on in order to get that first job. Like, how much time do I need to spend building more projects to add on to my portfolio, or how much time connecting with others on LinkedIn, like networking, and then how much time working on technical interviews, because I'll go through these like rampages of a couple days. All I'm doing is, studying data structures and algorithms and practicing, or then I'll go through days where I'm just coding projects, and then I'll go through days of applying to places, but it's not very consistent, I guess. And I think I should be more consistent and like balanced in my approach, but I'm just not sure how to figure that out, I guess.
What makes you feel that way? Why do you think you need to switch up your day-to-day and not bulk it like that?
I don't know. I feel like, I guess because I've seen, that's what a lot of people say, or what I've seen online of, oh, you should, 2 algorithms a day, and then an hour of personal projects, and then an hour of reaching out to people. But I've tried that, and all of those things could take more or less time based on, I don't know, the applications that you're applying to. Like, those could take much longer than an hour, if that makes sense. So I guess I'm trying to do what works for me, but I'm also not, it doesn't seem to be working, I guess.
Okay, so all I hear right now is you need to change things up because you hear other people tell you you need to change things up. So like if like scrap that advice, do you feel like what you've been doing, has it been working for you?
I don't think so, because because I haven't gotten as far as I feel like I should be by now. But that's also just my own like measurement of where I think I should be. So yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to know. So that's one of the hardest things, is like, am I being effective with my time? Am I moving closer to getting that first position? It's really, really hard to measure. So the reason why you are probably getting the advice, or you see the advice, you should break it up. Right. So first of all, I want to say, like, what you're doing might actually be the most effective thing, depending on your personality, but we'll dig into that.
Yeah.
So I usually tell people to break it up, because if they go through an entire day of, just learning data structures and algorithms, they're banging their head on the wall. Like there's a point where they're just like, I am tired of this. Like I nothing's sticking, right? And so that's what you have to analyze. It's not, I don't think you're gonna be able to figure out if what you're doing is effective at getting that position, given what you've told me. But what you should be paying attention to is if I go through an entire day of like learning, am I remembering everything? What happens when I try to implement it in a project? Is it sticking, or am I like just recall, or am I trying to look back at like 95% of the tutorial that I just learned, or data structures and algorithms? It's like, are you at a point where like maybe 2 hours in, the level of the challenge is the same difficulty, but it's taking longer? Does that mean that like, your mind needs a break from that? Those are little things that you have to pay attention to. But the most important thing is look for that in terms of if you are doing the correct thing. Because if you can go, 6 hours is learning data structures and algorithms, your mindset is being trained to be able to do that. And if you're not burning out by the end of it, that can be very effective. It's what a lot of entrepreneurs focus on, like what a lot of content creators will like bulk. I'll bulk like just recording a bunch of videos and then editing all the videos on one day, and breaking it up like that. It's not forcing my mind to context switch, because when I context switch and tackle an entirely different problem, my mind takes a while to warm up to that idea, and it takes a while to just prime it to be able to think in the way that I need to think. So my question to you is like, entire day of data structures and algorithms, are you just completely like burned out on hour 3 and struggling to get through the rest of them?
I would say not usually. I pretty much go until I'm burnt out, but then I'll take a day or two, and then I'll come back. And I usually understand it a little more once I've given my mind that break. But that's interesting you talk about content switching, because I feel like observing what I do usually on a day-to-day basis, I'm focused on one thing, and I do that a lot before I kind of switch modes and do something else, versus what I was talking about, doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I don't think that works for me. But I think, yeah, like you said, figuring out how to measure if what you're doing is working is one of the hardest things, but also like the most important.
Yeah. Just listening to you, it sounds like you prefer to be focused, and you prefer to take some extra hours to continue focusing on that single line of tasks. And knowing yourself like that is really important. And it sounds like you kind of recognize that in yourself. Now, but if we look at the whole week though, and I think that's where we can start breaking it down into a ratio of, okay, everything that I'm doing, is it effective at getting me that position? So usually, like if I had to break it down into a ratio, I usually say you graduate a coding boot camp, it's 70% is project work until you get a job. Like it's a ridiculous amount should be spent on project work, reinforcing what you're learning. I've seen so many people trail off, and even employers like bring up like, okay, you built these projects during a coding boot camp, but it's been 3 months. What have you worked on? Oh, well, I'm practicing data structures and algorithms. And like, I think part of what you want to show employers is like what you're curious and interested in, right? Like there are 500 other developers. Like, why should we hire you? You built 3 templated projects from a coding boot camp. What do you even care about? Like our company actually really loves accessibility. Have you even attempted that? Or like, I don't really see that in your projects. Or like our company, we have a lot of data coming through, and we actually have to optimize a lot. Like we have a lot of data manipulation on the front end, right? We don't want to hit our back end too often. So we actually need people that care about optimization, care about algorithms more, right? And so when you continue building projects that specialize in certain different areas, it'll show what you're interested in, and it'll catch certain employers' attention that also care about what you care about. That's a really good way to align what you're learning with the stack that you're going to be working on with a company.
Yeah.
So with that said, 70% project work. I would say 10 to 15% data structures and algorithms, probably no more than a half an hour of learning each day. After you graduate a coding boot camp, like a lot of your learning should be project work. Okay, This project's getting more complex. I'm stuck here. What do I do? Then it's looking up like an extra article. It's looking up a little supplemental learning to be able to build out the feature that I'm struggling with right now. And so it's very little supplemental learning. And sometimes with the coding bootcamp, it didn't quite get you to where you thought it would be. So maybe it is, you bump that up to an hour, you bump that up to an hour and a half max. But you have to figure that out. And you could figure that out by looking at other people's projects. How complex are they compared to yours? Did they implement authentication in a neater way? And it's like, theirs much cleaner. Why isn't yours as clean as theirs? Like, what did they do differently, right? And it's, sometimes you can kind of compare your portfolio project a little bit. I would be careful about doing that too much. But it's just like meeting other aspiring developers will, and looking at their projects will also kind of give you a benchmark of where you are. So I think it's something that's very underused. But yeah, and then it's really, if you can put in, like, I'm telling you, full-time job search, if you are doing company research and you are putting in a cover letter, and then afterwards you put in your resume, your cover letter, and you reach out to the software engineering team, and I've talked about how you can do that. But if you're putting all that time in, like 15 jobs a week, you should be doing that at a minimum. But 15 jobs a week is pretty good. You can bump that up a little bit, but I see way too many people just putting in 50 applications and really neglecting your growth. That has to happen after you grow or after you graduate. You have to work on projects. So like, the most important thing that you can do and be confident that you're moving in the right direction is 70% project work. It needs to be tons of coding, tons and tons of coding. And then a lot of it is just breaking it into like networking, applying for jobs, a little bit of data structures and algorithms. And I would say about that balance should be spread throughout the entire week.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. All right, cool. How about you guys?
Kind of ditto with Kristen. I have a hard time balancing out. I try to network in LinkedIn, basically everything that she does or has done. And if I dedicate too much time into it, it's hard to shift gears. And say, for example, I spend an hour reaching out to recruiters. Then I decide to apply for jobs for 2 hours. And then after that, I want to get back to a project I was so it's really I only get to do, well, I end up not doing as much as I wanted to do in that day, and it just kind of bundles everything up. I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
Yeah, you are. You mentioned you don't feel like you get to do everything you want to do. What's lacking at the end of your day?
I feel that a lot of the other extra stuff I need to do to network, to apply jobs, just tend to suffer because creating projects in itself requires so much of our time. I feel that's I could have built a lot better projects. Not anything that I've done has been just the easy peasy, like walk in the park type stuff. But yeah, I felt that I could have gotten some more projects up on my portfolio if I would have dedicated more time to that.
Okay. And so, yeah, we talked about that ratio for the week. So first of all, with context switching, I'm telling you, I know I frustrated teammates that I've worked with. I love context switching. I literally, like an hour into coding, I'm ready to talk to someone. Like I just love engaging with people, and I'll bug them on Slack. And people, like, there are a lot of software engineers that will like mute so no one can reach them for like 2 hours. Mine is open 24/7, right? And so I'm really weird with that, but I completely can empathize and understand when people, they need that time to like really train their mind and get focused and get into that rhythm. So it's a balance that you.
So I guess when you're doing all these tasks, it's kind of hard to gauge what is getting you the most return. I think I heard a little bit of that when Kristen was talking. it's trying to gauge what you're spending your time on and how much return you're getting out of that. And I know you mentioned that projects is going to be about 70%, but networking, you don't get anywhere if you don't write people, and even that is fickle enough as it is. So I guess that's what's kind of tripping me out. Is it's spending the extra. Is it worth spending the extra 20 minutes or 30 minutes networking or applying to jobs? Maybe that's job that you didn't know to, but we're going to apply to. What's the one that was going to be the in? Little things like that.
Yeah, that's it's a really common concern, and so it would be ideal. It would be perfect if we had like years to measure this for our individual self and figure out like what really works for you, right? And that's unrealistic. A lot of people just don't have tons of money to just sit on, and so we're trying to get a job as soon as possible, and we're trying to improve our lives as soon as possible. And so a lot of this is, over time, like let's say you could do this for yourself. What you could do is you kind of have this inkling that networking could really be key in, getting some more callbacks, right? And getting considered more and getting your resume noticed on top of that, versus 499 other developers that are applying for the position. So you have this idea. And so you're hearing, it probably came, I would say that's accurate. And it probably came from advice that a lot of developers are sharing. And so what I think is helpful is to recognize if you hear advice, like if you hear software engineers that got into the industry, you hear them share their advice, and across like 10 developers that got into the industry, like 9 of them suggested this advice. I think we kind of have to, at some point, trust a lot of the strategy that's already been figured out, right? And that's getting a lot of, so you have to listen. It's a lot of listening, and that can even come like if you're not connecting with software engineers, if you're not talking to people to figure this out, I would literally reach out to engineers on LinkedIn. Again, limit your time. I always say 10 minutes, but it could even just be a text chat and just ask, a couple questions, but figure out how software engineers got their position or how they think they got their position. You look for patterns like that, right? That's what's going to help you be more efficient and save you time in finally getting that position. You're never going to know for certain, but if you want to do a little test for 3 weeks, right? I wouldn't just do like a few days. You went to 3-4 different meetups in 3 days somehow, and you network with all these people, and now you're not even getting a job, right? That's not data that's going to be effective or helpful for you. And so if you really want to analyze something, you're like, I really think this is going to be effective, you got to spread it out into weeks, at least weeks, and measure that. And just say, you could even track it. Like during this week, I went to 2 meetups, or during this week, I reached out to a dozen people on LinkedIn, or just whatever you want to try, do that for a few weeks. And see if you do start at least getting connections on LinkedIn. See if you do at least get one person, one hiring manager, one recruiting manager to reach out to. And I think using the strategies that a lot of people are sharing and that sound very common across many software engineers, try one of them, do it for a little while, and see if it is effective. That's probably the best way that you can measure something like that. But even a few weeks isn't a large time, and you could be doing the right thing, but it might just take a couple months and that's the thing about networking. It's really important. So a lot of people realize networking is really important, getting that position that can make you stand out. But a lot of people like network even just for a few weeks and then stop. They're like, I'm not getting called back, so like this isn't that important, right? And a lot of the effects with networking will come down the road. It might be long term. You might hear things like 3 months later, as maybe 6 months later. I know 6 months sounds like a long time, but you don't really know where you're going to be in 6 months. So I think starting networking as early as possible, I think, is a really good thing to do. And I've personally seen the effects of what that can do in making people stand out. So I would say it's a good thing, but it's a little bit of trial and error, consistency and persistence to finally see the results of something like that.
Right.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. It does, and it's and I see the trends that I'm getting now. Before I wasn't getting any interviews at all. Now I'm getting contacted by recruiters every week, and I'm getting an interview at least one interview every week.
Oh, that's awesome.
More rejections than interviews, but at least I'm getting one interview per week. I've interviewed with Amazon for their AWS services as a front end, a 8 K to 12 online school. So I am getting interviews, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I had an Amazon recruiter reach out to me. I never heard back. So you're further than I was. That's huge. Yeah, it's really tricky. And part of this is it's having realistic expectations. It's probably going to take longer than you think it is.
Yeah.
But also you have to have patience and kind of trust the process as well. A lot of this strategy is already, you've probably heard about a lot of good strategy of what to get. I know sometimes it can be overwhelming, but one of the best things you could do is, like I said, track as much as you can and just try to figure out like sometimes it's just making a guess or an assumption at what you think is getting you a call back. But I'm telling you, a lot of the times it's building up your network connections, being proactive and reaching out after you put your resume in, aligning your values with the companies, like not lying, like just pretending that you have the values the company has. A lot of that is pretty obvious. And that'll kind of spill out into the interview. But it's, if you have a company that's like, I love what they're doing, this is really cool, and like showing your excitement in the cover letter, that's a good thing. But yeah, I know it can be tough.
Yeah,
a lot of
it's all part of
so like all
part
your
of the game.
that's what it is. A lot of your questions are super common. I think a lot of developers like want this very concrete path of getting a job, and there just isn't one. There really isn't one. But I would argue even the advice, you even look at your own day-to-day. Like just think about like everything that we talked about. Are you networking? Are you really working on a lot of projects? A lot of people's days don't align with what they claim that they're doing, like day to day. A lot of people aren't consistent, and it's pretty human nature to like fall off the tracks. So I think it's common, but we have to really, like, if you really want to figure out why you're not getting a job, it's like a lot of people know what they should be doing, but they look at the past 3 weeks. If they tracked everything, they're doing like half of it. I literally have never met an aspiring developer that's just like for the past 3 weeks, they tell me that this is what they're doing. Then I look, they haven't even committed, and like they're like, oh yeah, I had to take a weekend off because I had to go to my sister's wedding or so. Okay. So then we keep digging into it, and it's like, you'll start to see like, we're not robots. We can't just do things perfectly every single day, but you can at least, when you track things, you can analyze, okay, I actually am falling off, so I should be aware of this. And I just got to try to be more consistent the next week.
No, completely agree. Yeah, so far I had a day of coding, either doing stuff on Scrimba, Code Signal, Code Wars, and applying to jobs. So far I've been consistent enough, even on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I'm always at the library, and they know me by basis.
That's pretty cool. And I think a lot of people will. So we can talk about strategy all day, but I think a lot of people will also get tripped up in the interview. I think a lot of people get tripped up in the interview. And we talked about, Kristen, just the challenges that you feel like you're not doing as well as you thought you would. I think one thing that I learned, the more anxious I am, the worse I do in interviews. Like, that's an obvious statement to make, but I think a lot of people underestimate how much they're hurting themselves in the interviews. And I would even look at it like this. When you go into an interview, I think a lot of people, because like you're not a manager, you're finally getting into the industry. And I've had this feeling as well. I'm like, I was very intimidated. These are professional software engineers. These are brilliant people. And like, one thing I shared is like, when I met senior developers and I looked at their code and I worked with them, I'm like, they're not doing much more than I am. Like, they're doing it faster. Their implementations are a little bit cleaner and a little bit faster, but they're writing the same code as me. And I think sometimes we put like the interviewers on pedestals. These giant pedestals are way up there. And I think when you go into an interview, people have like, they automatically create this really unhealthy dynamic between you and the other person. And I think most companies that you want to work on, yeah, I mean, you need to show them respect. Don't ever talk down to them, just like they should never talk down to you. But you're just having a conversation with another person that, quite frankly, just wants to decide, like, do I want to work with this person? Are they open to growing as a software engineer? Are they humble? Or are they just coming in with a bunch of arrogance, telling me how I should do things, right? It's a lot of these interviews are just looking for like people they want to code with, and they can stand like day to day. Being with someone like 8 hours a day at work, like it can be like it can take a toll when you guys don't get along, when you guys are constantly like clashing. And I think that's a lot of what interviewers are looking for. And how do you handle, like, when you're really kind of pushed up against the wall and you tackle a problem, you're like, you start getting nervous. Do you get defensive? Do you just freeze up? Are you a developer that just says, you know what, screw it, like I don't know, help me? Like some people literally freeze up and just go silent, and they'll start feeling anxious, and they'll get inside their head. And it's like one of the worst things you can do. It's like, it's okay as a new developer, any developer, to just feel like, man, I'm stuck. I honestly just don't know how to move forward. And you'll find that interviewers are trained, and they get this with experience to just give you that next little tip to move forward, right? They're there with you to help you move along in the interview process. And so the more that you can stop putting these interviewers on a pedestal, your mind's going to be clear. You're going to learn a lot more from the interviews, which means you're going to get better with each progressive interview. And it just, I'm telling you, like, and then the interviewer kind of just will it's easier to resonate with someone that's kind of just engaging with them on the same level and having fun with learning to code and tackling the problem. And I think it's very attractive to hire a software engineer that's just curious and having fun, right? So I think a lot of people trip themselves up in the interview. So when people ask me, oh my God, how do I prepare for an interview? Give me resources. Give me, like, one of the first steps I tell them is like the best thing that you can do is get a good night's sleep, is exercise, is have a healthy diet, just really care about your personal well-being, your physical and your mental well-being. I'm telling you, you are going to be way more successful in that interview if you focus on that stuff versus trying to cram all this crap. Like, software engineers that have been in the industry couldn't just memorize all this crap for an interview, right? They know better than that. It's like, it takes time for a lot of this to reinforce. Just think about like the coding boot camp you just went to. It's like, did you just remember everything the very next day that you just learned? Hell no. Like, no student just can recall like that. We're not robots. So I think give yourself time to really just learn these concepts slowly. Like, you should be preparing for an interview just by doing project work and practicing algorithm type problems for weeks and let it really sink in. That's how you prepare. Don't cram, don't panic, get a good night's sleep, go into it and have fun and learn from it.
Yeah. Cool.
Well,
You want to try? There's a few questions on the board. One, I think that is some sort of follow-up to the conversation you had with Alex. You told Alex, preparing for an entry-level position, and especially remote, you really want to make sure you have good communication with the employer. And so, good conversation here, or good, How do you show actually your interviewer that you are going to have good communication skills?
Yeah, that's a really good. So that's a really good question. I really think highlighting the communication, like, just, employers will ask how you dealt with, some hard issues in the past of, like, maybe, we're just humans. We're going to work with individuals that we don't necessarily get along with. How do you engage that person in a way that you don't get along with, where you're being empathetic, right? And you're trying to come to some solution with this person, and it's just a little bit more difficult than you think it's going to be. And so a lot of it, I'm telling you, a lot of good communication will come from empathy. It's trying to figure out where the person is coming from. It's trying to figure out, like, what they're even struggling to be able to communicate with you. It's trying to, like, if they communicate in a slightly different way, and you could do this in the interview. It's demonstrating that you understand what they're saying. And if you don't understand, it's asking questions, right? It's like, you can point out to specific harder situations that you've dealt with in your previous experiences. But a lot of proving your communication is just your engagement with the interviewer. And, like, when we talk about data structures and algorithms, it's making sure that you fully understand the problem. And like a developer that will just like talk to product manager remotely for 10 minutes and say, oh, I got it. And they spit out a bunch of tickets, and then they, work on an issue 4 hours, come to realize like they didn't even fully understand the requirements, right? And so maybe so we could like really break this down heavily, but for that one example, it's truly and fully understanding all the requirements, asking the questions to make sure you understand everything before you tackle the problem could be a small indicator that, when the company, needs a coding solution, that you are doing your best to fully understand the needs of all these other departments and the business needs. And, you can kind of introduce that by just the types of questions that you ask, even in the algorithm type challenge. It's looking for those little opportunities to, and even if like you misunderstand, you speak up and say, I honestly don't understand. Can you try to explain it to me in a different way? Or it's even, it's just being proactive with your conversation. Because what happens in a lot of remote positions with people that are kind of being tried out, they just kind of back off and people don't hear from them in a long time. And then when it becomes a problem is usually when they don't finish what, they set out to do. And it's like, okay, well, why didn't you do that? You could have approached us a lot earlier, and, we could have helped you, or we could have solidified these requirements sooner. So I think like diving in, I would have to look at like a very specific situation in the interview, but in my opinion, it's really, it's just engaging with the interviewer in a way that shows that you're empathetic, you care about what they're saying, and if you don't understand it, you speak up, you understand all the requirements, and a lot of that can just be shown a little bit in the interview. But if you have previous experience, like that IT position, and that's really huge. I'd be curious what your opinion is with that, Ludo.
I think it's tough, and I'm mentioning during the interview process. I think there's a few fundamentals that you want to do. One that I've been bad for years is doing proper follow-up. So you're getting the interview. You've met with the person. You really want to do a really nice follow-up 4 hours later. Like if you do it 2 days later, it's going to be weird. So there's a few tips, and of course during the interview itself, asking a lot of questions, showing that you've prepared, versus really waiting for the person to engage you, verbally, being the one that really seeks out more understanding. I think that will go a long way. Yeah. I know, Alex, you wanted to chime in as well. You had a few additional thoughts that you wanted to share.
Oh, sure. To kind of piggyback on this question here, how do you show interviewer good communication skills? One of the things that I found out was many software developers get really nervous in their interview, and most of them have a set script already in their head that they memorized on how to answer a lot of the questions. So an interviewer might ask you to tell them something about yourself, or to elaborate on some sort of project that you did, but they ask you a specific question about that project. But the interviewer or the software developer gets really nervous, and they go start from the start of their memorized script and go all the way through it. That's one way to show that you weren't listening to the interviewer, and that you're just reading off of a mental script. So that would be something totally to be aware of. I think it's okay to be nervous and to kind of have some idea of some points of what you're wanting to say in the interview, but over preparing for it could also cost you, in the sense that not being a good communicator, not listening to the question and not responding to just the question and what's being asked. Yeah. The other thing too, I think Don did a great job of saying this, but if you aren't quite sure of what's being asked of you, to definitely speak up and say, hey, I kind of have this idea of what you're asking me. Am I on the right track, or should I be looking at this from a different angle? A lot of times the interviewers will say, well, you're kind of going in the wrong direction. This is what we're kind of looking for. And I think as software developers and just people in general, we idolize the interviewer, and they're at a pedestal above us. And so we're afraid to ask questions, we're afraid to clarify, and we're afraid to get some feedback. But it's been my honest experience to be able to ask that question, hey, without giving me the answer, can you tell me generally from this question that you're asking me, what are you looking for? What is the type of information you're expecting to receive back? That will help me, in my mind, kind of backtrack and go, okay, this is how I should solve it. One of the things that I've done while I've been in boot camp here is to volunteer my time with the Code for America group. They have a brigade here that's Code for Anchorage. And that allowed me to get in with an actual group that is actually working on projects, civic-minded projects, and allowed me to get in with a bunch of other engineers. Most of them are back-end developers. They've thrown together front-end projects, but they're not really strong in that suit. And here I am, going through the front-end front-end boot camp, and these things are kind of fresh on my mind. So a lot of the projects that they had were kind of in my mind. They could have been a lot better front-end wise. So I felt really confident that I could jump in and start applying a lot of the things that I had already been learning in the boot camp, and then to springboard off of that and touch bases with a lot of these engineers to figure out what is it that they conceptually want out of the project so that I can implement it. And that has helped me build projects for a civic group, and to make sure that I'm staying relevant with my skills, as well as pushes me to gain additional experience and kind of go further than what I've learned in the boot camp.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I appreciate you sharing that. Damn.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, no problem.
So we can, Don just texting me, we can do 10 more minutes. I'd love to do a wrap up. I think it was super insightful conversation. What I really enjoyed is how much actually you each brought a different perspective on the job search, really different struggles. There's a ton of questions online. I don't know that we're going to be able to go through all of them. I will say, though, that Don has live, first you offer one-on-one coaching sessions if some people want to have a direct conversation with you, but you also have on your channel live streams. I think it's Wednesdays and Fridays, and you're much better than me at actually answering all those questions. I mean, you really go through the chat, and you spend a good amount of time trying to really answer everyone who's asked questions. So if your question has not been answered right now today, I encourage you to actually go to Don's channel and ask them again on Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. So how about a wrap up, Don? What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, and Alex and Kristen and Gus, really, really thank you for sharing with us. Let me know what you think of what I picked up from the conversation. And I think with Alex, I think what really we zoomed in is how challenging it can be to get a remote job as the very first job you get in tech. And if it was last year, middle of COVID, I think every job was remote, and there was kind of expectation that, yeah, it didn't matter really where you lived. And I feel like things are changing, of course, for the good and the bad, because of course it was nice to be able to access any type of job in the US. But it's true that it's definitely an additional challenge to seek a remote job as the first position. And I mean, the conversation was great to really highlight the tricks and what you can do to actually overcome that challenge. I think it's still a handicap at the end of the day. But there's a ton of things that you can do to overcome that. And Alex, you'll be welcome on the West Coast in Seattle if you come here. And I know Gus, you wanna get you wanna get together as well. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be harder, but it's not impossible, obviously. I think for Kristen, what I recognize myself as I've hired engineers is you're going to find, I think, three types of companies or three types of hiring managers. You're going to find the hiring managers, typically the ones that you're going to find at Google, Microsoft, Facebook, where you have to pass those tests. Like, if you don't pass those tests, you're not going to make it, period. You're going to find companies that are going to be a bit more loose in how they're going to select a candidate. And you may or may not have a test. And maybe even if you don't pass the test, you're still going to be hired. And what matters to those companies are really you as a whole. right? It's what you bring in terms of story, it's what you bring in terms of personality, what you bring in the interview itself, how people feel about, working with you, your communication style. And so they're really going to look at it as a whole. And then there may be an element of test in it, and they may have some weight, but it may not be the whole story. And then you're going to have companies who just, there's no test. It's just going to be they see on your resume. They're going to try it out. Maybe they're going to test you for a month. They're going to see if it works out. And then you may or may not get a job at the end. And I think it's what's super hard, it feels, it's to really prepare yourself for all those three scenarios. And I think that's why there's such an important aspect of actually being ready to cater to those scenarios. And I'll tell you, for me, I care a lot about the story. And so when I was hearing you talk about, what you do during the day, data, like a story that someone brings to me and tells me, hey, I've spent my days doing data structure and algorithm, it's not enough for me to really become interested, right? Or that's not the story I want to hear. That's not the story that's going to make me interested in you as a coder, as an individual. And so that's where the project comes in. And I was really glad, Don, to tell you, to hear you say it's going to be 70% of your time, because for me, that's the most important aspect. That's really what I want to go into very deeply. It's talking about your project. What was the struggle? Why did you pick it? And things like that. So for me, it made it very clear why it's such a struggle to find the first job. Is you have to cater to so many different employer styles or hiring styles. And I guess at the end of the day, it should be also your style. I mean, maybe you don't cater to everything. Maybe you say, hey, I'm just going to bank on the story. And I'm just going to look for those, employers that really care about my story. Or maybe you're more I want to bank on my tech skills. I really dig data structure and algorithms. That's what I'm going to bank on. Maybe there's a trade-off here to make. I don't know. And then for Gus, I think listening to you made me also deeply understand why we say it takes 6 months, 9 months to find a job. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is there's so much competition for your time as you've just graduated. There's so much that you need to do that you don't actually have enough hours in the day. And most of you actually can do that full time. Most people actually cannot, they're not looking for a job full time. They're doing that on the side. You have to work on the project. You have to apply. You have to network. You have to do data structure and analysis. And so I think when people believe that it can take a few months, or when people wonder, why does it take so long? I think you're a great example. There's a ton of requirement on your time to go deep and to tackle all those aspects that's why it takes so long. So yeah, what did you think, Don? How was it? And all of you, Alex, Kristen, and Gus, what did you think of this conversation?
I thought it was great. Yeah, super insightful and motivating.
It's
very
definitely nothing. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say very eye-opening how a lot of these things have to do with perception. And Don, obviously not being in our steps, he's able to see things a little bit differently, I think, than the rest of us. So it was really good to get a different perspective outside of ourselves.
How about you, Gus?
Yeah, it's nothing new. I've read all these things on different message boards or other web applicators. But it's kind of sobering, and it's encouraging to kind of read the basics, not to get lost into tangents, and really kind of just stay firm and just, like Don said, trust the process.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. And like I said, I mean this, I'm not just saying this to blow smoke up you. Like, it's very telling that you were willing to come on and, show vulnerability like this. I'm telling you, most aspiring developers aren't even willing to do this. So I think that's going to really I don't know. I think that's going to really showcase who you are as a person in a very positive way. I'm sure it's going to come out in the interview. It's going to come out when you're working with other software engineers. And just because you haven't found a job yet, you might be surprised at how close that opportunity actually is. Sometimes it's just being a little bit more patient and giving it a little bit more time. But yeah, I think it says a lot of positive things about you that you were willing to come on. So hey, I had fun with this. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Thank you very much, everyone. We went a little bit
Thank you
over.
for having us.
Let's stay in touch. Really wish you all good luck with your search. Please give a shout out when you found the job. We should celebrate. Don, a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Alex, Kristen, and Gus. And again, everyone, you can find Don on his own channel. I think the link has been posted. And have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
ya. Thank you.
See ya.